basics of JavaScript. And I hope we can start from right there. So first things first, we talked about var, and we're able to talk about the let. Uh, then we're able to discuss const for constant, which are two different ways in which we get to declare our variables. And we said by default, we should always consider const as the default. And then we use let when you want to reassign any variable, whereas var is quite obsolete, but we can use it in so many different ways in JavaScript. We also talked about the different data types we had. We talked about string, which is any data type that is taken in its literal form. We talked about number. We talked about number, where we said in JavaScript we don't have floating point numbers, we just have numbers. We talked about booleans, which could be true or false. We talked about undefined, which is one variable that has been declared but we've not assigned it to any data type. We talked about null object, which is an object that is very famous in JavaScript bugs because nulls themselves are primitive. And then we talked about symbols, where we said symbols are unique identifiers. We talked about big integers, big int, with numbers that are extremely huge, like the one that I've highlighted on your screen. Now, moving forward, by the time we ended, I was talking about objects, where I was talking about different references in our code, where I said if you see these curly brackets, they represent an object, whereas these would represent objects in an array. So by the time we ended our previous class, we were discussing about the different coercions in JavaScript, where we say that in JavaScript, when you have a string and then you add a plus symbol with a number, it will just not concatenate. The opposite of concatenate is add, literally binding these two into one literal string, which would be 53 as a string. We also said that in JavaScript, if you got a string and then you subtracted it with um, a number, if what is within the string is a number, we would literally force a numeric conversion of this into a number so that we get the answer of 2. It would bring an error if it weren't a number inside here. For example, if you said scat in double quotation marks minus a number, then it would be an error. Then we said when it comes to multiplication, if you have a string with the number 5, and then you try to multiply it with 3 as a string, it would force this into numbers and do the computation, which we call coercion. And then we said that if you have a boolean 2 and then you try to add it to a number, it would force boolean 2 into a 1 and then false into a 0. Because in a literal sense, every 2 in computing is a 1, whereas every false is a 0. So that is another coercion we have in JavaScript. So another thing that is so similar to false is null. If you have a null and then you add it to a 1, it would force the null to become a 0. This type of mathematics is called forgotten its name, but it's mathematics that is really bizarre. So you have a false plus 1 giving us a 1, and now plus a 1 giving us a 1. However, if you have an undefined data type and then you try to add it to a 1, undefined is coerced to a NaN, and the answer will give us an NaN. Now there is another thing that we'll talk about that is called a strict equality. You see, we have a single equals sign, we have a double equals sign, and then we have a triple equals sign. And we always encourage people to use a triple equal sign if they do not want to have their values coerced. For example, if we say that 5 double equal sign to 5 in quotation marks, this is actually true because what we've used as a double equal sign is called a loose equality. It means coercion, a double equality with coercion. And I think we should always avoid this because uh, if you want to create equality, which is loose but coercion is involved, then you would always not get the evaluation on both sides as the one that you really require or ask for. Whereas on the other end, if we said 5 triple equal sign to 5 in quotation marks, then this is actually false because we've used strict equality and with no coercion at all. That means 5 has not been converted into a numeric format. And since it's in a string format, the two are not equal at all. So another example we can look at is if we said null is loosely equivalent to undefined. You see, with a loose equality like this is actually almost the same thing. So this is actually true. If you have a null value and you have undefined value, they are all literally the same. But if we try to make it a little bit more strict, then this is actually false. Null and the undefined are two different data types, primitive data types in JavaScript. So on a strict level, this is not true, but this on a loose level, this is actually true. So how do you check the different types correctly? One, you can say array is array. So in the array, if you find is array, and then in the brackets you add this array 1, 2, 3, then this would give us a true. Why? Because this actually has an array 1, 2, 3, which is a list within an array. And also another one is if you say the type of, just like we were writing type of in identifying the different data types, and then you say it null is equivalent to just an object in quotation marks. Now, triple equal signs I've just mentioned, they're equally very strict and they have no room for coercion. So this is true because when we use those triple equal signs, the null to check for null is actually null. So that's true. If we say the number dot is an NaN, and then we put in brackets NaN, then it's actually true because the type none is a number. But this is a little bit confusing because uh, we don't tend not to understand that an infinity number is actually a number. So when we say that we are looking at undefined number, a number that is not defined is actually a number, and that's true. When we find a number and we say it's finite and then we say infinity, that's not true because infinity is not finite. So that's false. We use these different types to check the types whether they are correct by saying array is array and then you give in an array. Type of the primitive data type and then you do a strict equality to whatever you want to define. Number is number, then you define the number in the parameter section of that query, and then number is finite when you want to find if a number is until infinity. Now let us look at functions. Looking at functions, we define functions by we can find functions if they are hoisted, and by hosting means can call before definition. You see, in the previous class, we learned that hoisting means that when you get to define something under a class, as during compile time, this would be taken ahead of that class for consideration. So we've had a function that is called format minute, format minute, and we gave it a parameter of minute. And within this function, inside it, we say return minute, and then we add this quotation mark to add that separator at the top, which is something which we did in Sportscope. And then we say console log format minute 75. Now this will give us an output of 75 minutes, but we've kind of declared a minute, and in the console log we've asked the compiler to just give it a 75 before it even does any increments. Hoisting is more of creating the starting value, but without writing it at the top of at the outermost top of the function, so that we understand what the variable minute is. So that this variable minute is initialized before the function itself is being it's declared before the initialization of the function format minute. We can also do something. We also have functions that are expressive and are not hoisted, which are a little different from the ones that are hoisted. If with these ones, we do not hoist anything. You just get to declare your constant, like we've said that we're declaring a constant which is format score. And this is equivalent to a function, then we get to give it a function. So the difference between this and this is that here we first start with the function itself, and then we give this function and accrue to it a parameter. And after the entire function is done, just like we do in Python, hoist you proceed to hoist the parameter of that very function. However, with the expressive ones, you get to declare your constant, which is format score, and then you provide it a function so that this constant is equivalent to that function. So when you have your constant format score and it's a function that has home and away, then you tell it to return home plus dash array. This will output more of something like home is 2, then away is 3. So home 1, something of that sort. This is expressive because it's a constant that cannot be redeclared by leading to a function that will be reusable, and expressive functions will be so popular in our JavaScript. The, we want to talk about what we call arrow arrays. These have more of a concise syntax. But before I go into these ones, let's first look at some of these concise arrays in practical. So let's get our Visual Studio ready. As it opens, let's get back here. So we have arrow arrays, I have said, and these are concise, and they have this so-called this. For example, when we say we have a constant which is format score that is equivalent to home and away, that we are attributing home plus array, and then plus away, and in between there is a string of a separator. In this particular case, we get to declare another constant called the double, and then we use an arrow where we say that n tends to be n by 2, which is called a single parameter, and there are no parentheses here. We can also have a constant greet, which is a bracket leading to hello. We are trying to say there are no parameters here, but here we need to use parentheses. Why? Because we are dealing with a string. In the earlier one, we didn't need parentheses because we're dealing with a numerical format where we declared n and then we multiplied this unknown number n by a 2. Then we have the third one where we declare a constant build card and then we give it uh, a parameter match, and then this we say tends to, and then we return whatever we want it to be. Now these are a little similar, they would almost lead to the same thing, but this is multi-line, it needs braces, it needs returning, and it's actually the most common than that you'll encounter. It's more object oriented, if I might say. When you look at the first one, we said home away is, then we made it lead to something. We said home dash away. Whereas this constant is, we have a number n and then we're multiplying it by 2, so we don't need those so-called parentheses. Whereas when we said greet, we just have an empty parameter and then we say hello, so that this empty parameter is just hello. But with the build one, you give your constant, you give your function a parameter, which is match, and you say it tends to, and then you say return ABCD. Whatever you do under this function must have a return value at one end. We have what we call default parameters, where we have a function like render commentary, and under that we get to add parameters deep inside this bracket. What does this mean? If you look at this function, sorry, okay, let's just go with what has been highlighted. When you look at that function, it's called render commentary. We have text and minute, but text is just on its own and minute is unknown under those quotation marks. And then we say type is general. We have text, minute has been attributed to question mark, and then type is general. So when we are returning, we are saying that data type is type, and then we have minute being returned, and then when it comes to text, we add a quotation, we get to define whatever text we are adding right here, so that we are able to render the text, the minute in which this text was returned, and then the type. This is one thing that we should have done when we were working on the commentary page. So the default parameters is that whatever you have in the parameters gets to be returned in whatever you're returning. So whatever you're doing under that function is to ensure that you're returning these three parameters within your entire function, and this is the default function parameter functions. We can also proceed to say right after this function that when you render community, you can say kickoff. This will say that it's minutes so and so, and the type is general. You can also say render community, you call this function, and you say it's goal in minute 75, and it's a goal. Now, this will say that it's minute 75, the type is goal, and the text is goal. So this default parameter is just all about getting whatever you put under parameters is being returned at one point by calling this entire function. And then the order of whatever was highlighted in the parameters section is reused within your code in one or the other. We also have what is called rest parameters, where we collect the remaining arguments into an array. Look at this function called log events. It has two parameters, match ID and dash 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 events. Under this function, we say that let's log the console and log it with match is the match ID from the parameter and has events length events. Remember, if you pay close attention here, we're using a backscore instead of a quotation mark. I want you to do research and tell me why we use a back score. So we shall say events, under events. For each event here, I want the error to lead to the console log. And then we shall say with the value E for events. Then we shall say log events 1, kickoff, goal, yellow card. And then to log that it's in the first very minute, there's been a kickoff, and then they got to score, and then there has been a yellow card. These are the different logs that are being logged using the REST parameters. We have what we call closures, which are functions that remember the outer scope. So if you have a function that is called make match timer and the parameter is match ID, we can use the declaration let to declare a variable minutes in the very first minute. So this is captured in closure. So if we are to return tick, and then we say let there be the very first minute. Now these minutes are, we see we had minute plus plus, then plus plus minute, and then we say there is an option to reset it back to 0, and then we get the minute, which is minute. Outside of this entire function, we can call the constant timer1, where we say the match timer should be 42. Timer1.tick is timer1.tick, and then timer1.tick. We can also log the console where we say timer1.getMinute, and this will completely use all other timers independently. That's why this is quite rare, but very possible. So we use the function, and outside of its scope, we use it to still remember it, and we can log in to the starting time 42, and then we keep on ticking this time on and on. I want us to, today we are still looking at syntax in JavaScript, the different syntaxes we have in JavaScript. With time, we shall put this into practicality. So let us look at the different control flows. We shall look at truthfully and falsely values. We shall look at false, like 0, -0, on, empty quotation, empty single quotation, empty backscores, null, undefined, NaN. So everything else is truthfully other than what I've defined above. And this includes 0 under a quotation mark is true, an empty box bracket, an empty curly bracket, and a function that is empty. So the only true false values that we have in JavaScript is the false itself, 0 and -0, on, empty quotation marks, empty single quotation marks, backscores that are empty, null, undefined, and NaN. So if we said that if match is into quotation marks dash 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 dash, this runs if the match is not null and undefined or 0. So this will actually run. If we say that if not player dot goes, this will run if goes is 0, null, or undefined. We have a short circuit evaluation where we can say that display name equals to player.nickname or player.full name. So so the first is a truthy value because we could be having a nickname and or a full name. So if there's no nickname, there is a full name. The OR operator saves this and pulls it into the truthy. We could be having a constant. This is what I was talking about, just in case you're lost. Now we could also be having a constant called goes, which is equal to player.stats, question mark dot goes, double question mark 0. This is sort of nullish and coalescing because 0 is only if null or undefined. So we don't understand why it is in this very position. So it's sort of a falsy. In JavaScript, we have the so-called switch in our flow. We've looked at true or false. We've looked at the short circuit where we had the operator or, we have operator and or, etc. Now we have the one we call switch. You can switch from one case to another by saying switch and then we give it a parameter, the event type. If the case is a goal, then increase the score and say add to commentary goal, player so and so has scored. The event minute is so and so and the type is goal. So break. And then we provide another case. We say if the case is a yellow card, then add to the commentary and say yellow card for, then you say the player, and then say they've done that in minutes so and so, and it's the type of that entry is a card in our commentary, and then break. And then we add another case where we say there's another case of being a red card. So we add to the commentary and we say the text is red card, player so and so is off. This is the text. We are still following a certain function we had here that had text. We are still following this format: text, minute, and then type. So that's what we are following for these cases. Don't ask me where we are getting this. So these different cases of goal, yellow card, red card, substitution, we add them under the different cases and then we break. And if all are done, we say the default is adding a commentary where we get to define the description and the event minute. Otherwise, we close our entire switches. So the switch will keep on switching from these different cases in case someone triggers the event of a different type of entry into our commentary. Switch is very important in control flowing because it gets to define something very easily and then populates it very easily. We have what we call loops. Loops are repetitive kind of flows in our JavaScript, where we can define a constant like events and then we call it kickoff or corner or goal. And then we create for the for loop, in this first case, we shall say that for if we let an integer to be 0 and we say that this integer is less than the event length, let it keep on increasing. This is very classic because we use the index. You need the index, so the index is actually 0 and then we get to log it. So the index time will start from 0, 1, 2, 3 until the 90th minute. We can also say that if it's not that, then for the constant event, for the event of we use this very much when we are in arrays. So if we say that for events, instead of using in events like we use in other programming languages, we say, like we shall say in PHP, we say for event in an array of events, log the event. So it will show you the different things within the events array. Then the other one is for in. If we had an array that has Kadu as name, then goes 12 constants 4, and then we want to pull out the player, we should say that for the constant key in player. So in an associative array, these are the keys and these are the values. This is a key and this is a value. This is a key and this is the value. So we are saying that for the constant key in player, let us console log the key and the player, and it will tell you the names and the players in that as the objects in that array. So that would mark the end of day 1, but just to give you a brief structure of control flow. Control flow is more of this. All right, we're going to load the whiteboard and then I show you control flow. Probably you've seen a control flows anywhere in Java, in mathematics. A level, if you did mathematics in A level. As it loads, let me load our work for day 2. And here we are going to look at arrays, higher order functions with a deeper understanding. We're going to apply objects and JSON in Spot Scope, and we shall be able to build uh, and explain the modern syntax from scratch. And we shall be able to write clean professional code following the best practices, and then extend Spot Scope projects with the different concepts in your coursework. So as we've loaded that, uh, what we mean by control flow is something like this. We want to say that we have a player P who is Kadu, and as someone is on our JavaScript, they would like to access Kadu. So their request will go in and we'll ask ourselves, is that request has their request been initiated by the event listener? If yes, then proceed to here. Is this request available in our database? If it's available, then take them to this. If it's not, take them to this. So this can be and this can be or. And means you can take them to both, or means you can take them to either of these two. Now, if there is a list of people, if there is a list of events that are happening, you can say that if this is events, you can say for event I in events, list the events, and we'll get to list the different events in the events array. We shall understand this more when we get into day 2, where we are talking about arrays. Arrays, so we have for each map, filter, and reduce. So for each map, one thing you need to know here is that when applying for each map and filter, we always consider three things, sorry: security, performance, and code readability. Did we use this? All right. All right. Let me see. All right. So what we are going to do on the project that we had created here is we are going to now arrange our code in appropriate manner by coming down to app and then views. And then before we go into views, yes, we have the htaccess. It's time to rearrange everything of ours into an orderly manner so that we can now start the front end in an object-oriented way. Since now we've understood the beginning concepts in JavaScript, now we need to create ways in which we can best utilize JSONs. A minute. All right. So like I was, you'll have to excuse me for a minute. Just excuse me for just 5 minutes. All right. As I was saying in one of our first classes, is that some of the main things that we shall be having in our code would be app config public vendor .env.htaccess and a readme. So what we are going to ideally do is that mm, let me see. So one first thing we're going to do is to create an htaccess file. An htaccess file tells it tells an htaccess tells the browser that it tells the server how to help browsers to access these things in a different way, just in case we're not using indexes. By default, uh, the person trying to access your files will access it through an index file, index.php, index.js, index.html, and that's what we want. Now, when we come here, we need to write some Linux language through what we call the htaccess. It gives the different rules of what can be accessed on the server and what cannot be accessed. So the first thing that we're going to do is to understand how all requests will be routed to index.php. So the first thing we shall do is we are going to accept the write engine on. So we say we shall say rewrite engine should be equal to on. Pay attention to capital letters. This will accept the engine to accept rewrites and all that stuff. Then we shall set the base directory to use the slash if not if the file is not in root, and then slash the subfolder if it's not in a specific subfolder. So we shall say rewrite base base equals to slash. No, we don't say equals to, we say slash. We don't use equals to. I've just recalled, we just mentioned something. You give me a minute. Let me first send a very important text message here. All right. You'll excuse me as I'm doing. So we're going to, what we've done first is we are trying to control, we're trying to create a front end controller configuration right from the htaccess that is at the root directory of this website. So we turned our engine on, we created a base whereby in case we say slash this and this, we shall have set the base directory. And yeah, I was saying that if you're in the root folder and that's why you're using this htaccess, you just say slash. But if you're in the subfolder, you say the name of the subfolder, then slash. So if in case this was not a root directory, let's say we are under public, we would have said public slash. But since we're in the root directory, we just say slash. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to allow direct access to the raw files and directories. And what I can say is that if the requested path is an actual file, then serve it as is. So we can say that we are going to say rewrite condition is no, you know that means yes. Then we say this is requested file. Request file name. Request. No. Caps. Request underscore file name, and then we close, and then say exclamation mark dash f for file name. What this ideally does is that if the requested file path is an actual file, then serve it as is. That's what it means ideally. Nope. I prefer the dash f. F. Right. Then the next thing we're going to do is that we're going to write a condition whereby if the requested path is an actual directory, and then we serve it as it is. Instead of the file, now we are looking at a directory because we are trying to create routes in which we have a professional object-oriented structure. So we shall again say write just a minute. How can you? To what? Have you cleaned here? But I once left here and I told you can clean, I'm coming. You first wait, I'm about to finish. So we shall say rewrite condition is exactly the same as previously. So we shall say we can copy this. We can copy this and then paste it here. But what changes here is the directory. So if that directory is existent, then you can pass the directory as is. Now, the next thing you're going to do is that you're going to route everything else through index.php. What we've done is that just in case we create a file somewhere that is not routed, then it needs to be entered in the browser as is. If there is a directory that will not be routed in index.php, then it should be written as is. Else, the remaining then, or else if nothing is anything, then it should follow the routing that is in index.php. So we shall say rewrite rule is, what is the reroute rule? It's you need to find index.php and then in index.php I want you to get QSA and then relate L. So I'm trying to tell you that everything else should be routed through index.php, where QSA stands for the append existing query string, and L stands for stop processing rules after these ones. So no more other route is needed other than index.php. I hope we are together. I've said QSA stands for append existing query string, while the L stands for stop processing rules after this one. Now, the third thing that we're going to do is we're going to protect sensitive files from direct browser access. For example, the .env that we created, and we can create many others like JSON files that we are going to create with. So we shall say files match, and then we get to find these files that will be matching that we want to protect in here, and then we shall close. But just to append everything, okay, so we shall say find each and everything that has the extension .env and .json. These are some of the sensitive files that we always have, because there's packages.json that we shall have, then the .log packages.log file, then the markdown file that might have our documentation. You can log it from here. .log, which is our log file, .sh, which is our script file, and then .git, which could be having details about our GitHub repository. And then I'm going to add all these in a bracket. I'm going to add all these in a singular bracket and then tell it those are the ones. So after doing this, after protecting everything, the other thing that the htaccess file does is we are going to allow what is allowed and what's not allowed under this list. So